You're listening to sermon audio from Our Church Dayton. For more information on service times and ways to follow us online, please visit us at ourchurchdayton.org. That's ourchurchdayton.org. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, so we've been talking about Moses. Josh Latham, Josh May, and Zach Burchett have done a great job in walking us through the journey of Moses and the Israelites and everything that has gone on. So from Moses as a baby escaping death, to the burning bush when God chose him to lead his people, to the plagues over Egypt and all the Passover. And we covered the Israelites leaving Egypt and crossing the Red Sea, God's provision and law, and what the 10 Commandments are. So who knows what we talked about last week? The tabernacle. That means Valerie gets a Bible book because she got help from her mom. Okay, so this week, we're going to talk about the rebellions. Yeah. All right, so I know we have a lot of Star Wars fans. Who's a Star Wars fan? Yeah. All right. Okay, so in Star Wars, the rebels are the good guys. Their stories are exciting as they're fighting against a broken and oppressive system. However, that's not the case for the Israelites. The actual definition of the word rebellion is an act of open resistance to an established government or the action or process of resisting authority. So we're going to look at the ways that the Israelites resisted God's authority and why that's important for us to see. So don't be confused. It's not like Star Wars where the rebels are the good guys. Rebelling against God is actually bad. All right. So, God saved the Israelites from slavery. Hooray! He performed amazing miracles to get them out of Egypt to escape. Hooray again! He provided food for them with manna. Even more hooray, right? All right, and he provided guidelines and teach them how to live with the 10 Commandments. So many hoorays, so many great things that God has done for everyone. So they're on this journey to head over to the Promised Land, which is Canaan, and they're packing up and leaving Mount Sinai. All right, so let's look and see how excited they are to continue on their God-led adventure. We're going to look in Numbers 11, verse 1. Now the people complained about their hardships in hearing the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed them in some of the outskirts of the camp. What? So, what do you mean they were complaining? God has done so much for them. What could they possibly complain about? So if we continue on to verses 4 through 6, then it gives us a little bit of a better idea. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, garlic. But now we've lost our appetite and we have nothing but this manna." So, God is providing for the Israelites. But that isn't good enough. God is preparing this manna special for his people. And they're just over it. They're even craving the food that was given to them when they were in slavery. This is unbelievable. God is so angry, and rightfully so. And it troubles Moses too. In verses 11 through 15, Moses tells God that the burden of taking care of the Israelites is too much to bear. He basically calls them a bunch of crying babies. But they want meat. And where is Moses supposed to get the meat? Enough meat to feed everyone. God heard Moses. So he gathers up 70 leaders, and he said that he would take some of his spirit that was on Moses and put them on the 70 leaders so they can share the burden too. That's so kind. And God says that he will even give them meat. So much meat that will last them for a whole month. So much meat that it's actually going to come out their nostrils and they'll end up hating it. So God basically said, "You want meat? I'll give you meat." And Moses was like, but where are we supposed to find this meat out in the wilderness? And God said, I will give you the meat. Just wait and see. So Moses did all that God said, and the Spirit was shared among the leaders. And then in verse 31 through 34, it says, now a wind went out from the Lord and drove quail in from the sea. It scattered them up to 2 cubits deep all around the camp, as far as a day's walk in any direction. All that day and night, and all the next day, the people went out and gathered quail. No one gathered less than 10 homers. Then they spread them out all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth and before that it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague. Therefore, the place was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who craved the other food. Yikes. So the people complained, and they got exactly what they wanted. It's almost like they didn't realize what they were actually asking for. It's almost like God knew what was better for them than they even knew, but they did not know that. Surely they learned their lesson to trust God and do what he says, right? All right, well, let's take a look at Numbers 12, 1 through 2 and find out. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, because he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? They asked. Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. Yowza. That sounds like gossip and jealousy to me. They were questioning the authority of Moses, and God handpicked Moses himself. So if they're questioning Moses as a leader, then they're really questioning God's judgment. So God called a meeting with Moses and Miriam and Aaron, and he came down in a pillar of cloud and spoke to them, saying that, yes, he speaks to other prophets in dreams and visions. But he speaks to Moses face to face. He doesn't have to use riddles. He can just sit down and have a conversation with Moses, and that's what makes Moses different. He questions as to why they were so bold to speak against the man who knows God in a very, very personal way. So God was so angry that they would even question that when he left them, Miriam was left with leprosy, and Moses had to intercede on her behalf. So Moses had to talk to God to put a case for Miriam, so then God would heal her. She had to leave the camp for 7 days, but God did heal her. So God showed the Israelites that they can trust and obey him. He demonstrated that they all should trust and obey Moses, the man that God himself called to lead them. Then God told Moses to have some people scope out the promised land before they made their grand entrance. Does anybody remember the name of the promised land? I just mentioned it at the very beginning real quick. Does anybody know the name of the promised land? There's a Bible book. Anybody know? Canaan, that's right.
That one goes to Nova.
That one goes to Nova. So they spent 40 days scoping out the land, and they came back telling Moses and everyone else that the land is everything that God promised. It's flowing with milk and honey. They brought back fruit of the land, including grapes, pomegranates, and figs. But they also told everyone that they can't go in the land because the men that live there are very big, very strong, and very scary. So, this is what happens. In Numbers 14, 2 through 4, it says, all the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we died in Egypt or in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should just choose a leader to go back to Egypt. What? Did you guys hear that? They have seen everything that God has done to get them out of Egypt. And they're getting scared. And instead of trusting that same God that took them out of that place of slavery, they are wanting a reverse exodus to go back into slavery. That's so wild. You've got to be kidding. So, out of the men who went to scope out the land, so out of all the guys who went to go check out the promised land, only 2 of them, a young man named Joshua and a young man named Caleb, only 2 of them said, we don't need to be afraid because God is on our side. God promised us this land. But everybody listened to the scaredy guys instead. Everybody wanted to be scared with those other guys and go back to Egypt. So, how do you think that this made God feel? There's a Bible book. If anybody can tell me how God felt after he heard that. Yeah, Luke, what's up? You got the answer? Yeah, that's right. He was angry. And I would be too if I had shown everybody what I was capable of and they didn't believe me anyways. I would be so upset. So by this point, Israel had tested God 10 times. So he told them that they will not enter the promised land. They will die in the wilderness, and their kids will get to enter the promised land. So what should have been an 11-day trip from Mount Sinai to the border of Canaan ended up taking the Israelites 40 years because they were cursed to wander the wilderness. So the guys who spread the bad report and tried to lead everybody away from God, they all died. So everybody who went to Canaan and saw what they had to offer, they all died, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, because they trusted God. And everyone learned their lesson to always listen to God, right? Is that how the story goes? No, I wish. I wish that's how the story went. In Numbers 14:40, it says, early the next morning, they set out for the highest point of the hill country, saying, now we're ready to go up to the land the Lord has promised. Surely we have sinned. So this sounds good because they want to do the right thing. But actually it's bad because they missed their opportunity. God said, go to the promised land. And they were like, no, it's too scary. And so God's like, fine, don't go to the promised land. And they're like, okay, we'll go to the promised land. They're not listening to God. They are literally doing the opposite of what he's saying every single time. So Moses said, if you go there, you are going without God. And the people in the land are going to defeat you. And so they still went anyway. They went without God and they got defeated. So moving on to Numbers 16, 1 through 3, it says, Korah, the son of Izhar, and the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and certain Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, became insolent, or it means they took men, and they rose up against Moses. With them were 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders that had been appointed members of the council. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far. This whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. So why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? Well, haven't we heard the same story just a minute ago? Isn't this exactly what Miriam and Aaron tried to do? They tried to pull this exact same stunt when God showed them that Moses was not chosen by accident. And now these people wanted to challenge Moses and Aaron? Okay. So after this, how did God feel? Anybody know? How did God feel after he heard this? Yeah, Luke. Yep, exactly. God was so angry because, again, people are questioning God's judgment. They're not trusting him. So God opened up the earth and swallowed these men that tried to lead the rebellion. And then fire burned the others that tried to follow. God wanted to destroy the whole community that these men were in to prevent more people from rebelling or misleading the Israelites. But Moses interceded on their behalf. Moses went and talked to God for them and made a case for them. So God spared them and only put an end to those who were directly disobeying him by trying to send the others to disobey as well. The Israelites saw this, and they were repentant and turned away and trusted God, right? I wish. Instead, in Numbers 16:41, it says, the next day, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And they said, you killed the Lord's people. They complained again. They didn't see that these men that they called the Lord's people were actually doing the opposite of what God wanted. At this point, God is so upset with all the complaining that those who had come to complain just dropped dead. Then a plague came over the Israelites, killing more of them. And Moses had to tell Aaron to make an atonement for everyone so the plague will stop and it will save their lives. And that's exactly what happened. Aaron made the atonement for everybody, and they were all saved. So, after that, we move on to Numbers 20, verses 3 through 5. And it says, they quarreled with Moses and said, if only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? They have no grains, no figs, no grapevines or pomegranates, and there is no water for us to drink. What? They're complaining again? Now I really feel like I'm in deja vu. Haven't we seen this before? Does anybody feel like that we've heard these stories before? So the first time the Israelites complained about food, what did God give them? Does anybody remember when Josh Latham spoke about this? Yes, what did God give them? Yeah, exactly. That's when God gave them manna. Here you go. So they complained about food, and God provided. He gave them manna. They complained about food again, and then what did God give them? We talked about it at the very beginning. Yeah, Abby. Exactly. He gave them quail. So you think that after seeing God provide for them time and time again, that they would catch on and be like, okay, God has this under control. But instead, they're complaining about food and water. And on top of all of that, they said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grains, figs, grapevines, or pomegranates. But where did they have the grapes, figs, and pomegranates? We just read that. Does anybody know? What? Exactly. It was in the promised land. God literally gave them everything that they wanted. He was providing for them. And they said they didn't want it. They were the ones who rejected it. And now they're complaining that they don't have it. What? It's like the toddler that cries because they want an apple. I'm sure all parents can relate to this. So you wash and cut the apple, you even peel it for them, and you give it to them, and then they start crying because they don't actually want the apple. Fine. I'll eat the apple then, since I already went to all this trouble. And then they start crying because they actually did want the apple. Now you don't even have the apple anymore. Very relatable. So God is a God of mercy and love, though. So he tells Moses and Aaron to take Moses' staff and speak to a rock, and they'll get some water. And not only will this give the Israelites something to drink, but it will remind them of who God is again. But Moses and Aaron went out there, and Moses took things into his own hands by striking the rock, not just once, but twice. God still honors his promise, though, and gives the Israelites water, and water does come from the rock. But God is disappointed that Moses and Aaron, that they took things into their own hands, and that is actually an act of rebellion, because instead of trusting to God and doing what he said and listening to him, they decided to do things their own way. So now they can't enter the promised land. So, as the Israelites are traveling, they want to pass through Edom, but the king says no. So they have to go around. And that meant that they had to pass by Canaan again. So the Canaanite king knew that they were coming and attacked the Israelites and took some of them. The Israelites, for real this time, they really did finally learn to turn to God in their time of need. And they said, God, we will destroy this city. We will destroy our enemy as long as you give us our people back. And God heard them, and he did this. They did what they promised God, and God delivered their people. So this is how they responded to God's faithfulness. In Numbers 21, 4 through 5. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route of the Red Sea to go around Edom. But the people grew impatient on the way, and they spoke against God and against Moses. And they said, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food. What? Will they ever learn? They're repeating the same story over and over again. And God is getting angry, rightfully so. God sends venomous snakes, and they're biting people, and they're dying. They confessed to Moses that what they had done, that they had been complaining, and so Moses intercedes again. He's talking to God on their behalf. And God tells him to make a snake and put it up on a pole, so when they're bit, they can look at the snake and they're healed. Weird, but it worked because God is faithful. So, just a quick recap of everything that we had talked about. So, God saves the Israelites and provides for them. They are worried about the lack of meat. They complain. God hears them. God gets angry. Moses intercedes, and God forgives and provides. Miriam and Aaron, they don't like the way that Moses is leading. They complain. God hears them. God gets angry. Moses intercedes, and God forgives and provides. The Israelites are worried about huge people in the promised land. They don't like the way that Moses and Aaron are leading, so how do the Israelites respond? Can anybody see where we're going with this? There's a Bible book, if anybody knows. How did they respond? They complained, and God hears them. God gets angry, Moses intercedes, and God forgives and provides. Korah and a few hundred other men, they don't like the way that Moses and Aaron are leading, so they complain. God hears them. God gets angry. Moses intercedes, and what does God do after Moses intercedes? Does anybody know? Yeah. Exactly. He forgives and provides. So then the Israelites are worried about lack of food and water again. They also don't like the way that Moses and God himself are leading the people. So they complain. God hears. God gets angry. Moses intercedes and provides. God forgives and provides. So they're on this loop, repeating the same story again and again. And it's funny to see how a group of people can experience the glory of God, and they still think that they're the ones running the show. What? How can one group of people get things so backwards and be so messed up? It's nice to look at these stories and laugh at them and say, I could never be like that. But the thing is, you have been like that. I've been like that. I read a commentary on the Bible Project's website, and it mentions that the rebellion stories are like cartoon characters. Like, you know, the drawings that you see at zoos and fairs and amusement parks. The artist takes a look at you and takes specific details and magnifies them out of proportion until they're so funny to look at that you can't help but laugh. It's like reading these stories is like looking in front of a wavy mirror. You think it can't possibly be you, but then when you look closer, you realize it's way more relatable than you think. How many of us have seen God provide for us, and yet we still worry about what tomorrow holds? How many of us have disobeyed or questioned a leader or parent that God has put over our lives? How many of us have thought that we know better and try to figure things out on our own? How many of us have forgotten to even consider the way of the Lord when we get wrapped up in our own concerns? These stories are us. We are these stories. The Israelites weren't rebelling against God because they hated him. Sometimes they were afraid and they forgot to trust in God. Sometimes the culture that they grew up with in Egypt clouded their judgment. Sometimes they did believe that they knew what was best and just forgot to consult God and trust him. I think sometimes they were hangry. You know, when you get so hungry that you get angry and just complain about everything? I think that might have happened to them too. When you put it into perspective like that, it's very relatable. It's easy to see how we can all fall into that same trope. But God didn't want to see us stuck in this same sinning cycle. So he broke the cycle. He sent Jesus. God did get angry at the Israelites, a just anger, because God is a God of justice. So, you know, when you see somebody do something that you know is wrong, and so it makes you really angry, it's like that. But Moses intercedes on their behalf, and God forgives them every single time. It didn't matter how many times they messed up. It didn't matter what they did. God forgave them every single time. There are still consequences for our actions, so some were punished for their sins. But once Moses stepped in and spoke to God on their behalf, God forgave the Israelites and even continued to provide for and still take care of them. It's hard to see in these stories, but God still loved them. So when we choose to follow Jesus, he then starts interceding on our behalf. Like Moses did for the Israelites, Jesus is doing that for us. When we make mistakes, Jesus is sitting right next to God saying, forgive them. And because Jesus is advocating for us, then we can go directly to God for forgiveness. In 1 John 2:1, it says, "My dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one." And in Hebrews 7:25, it says, "Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them." He always lives to intercede for us. Praise God. We know that Jesus died for the ransom of our sins. We know he defeated death and was raised to life. We know that he is sitting next to God, waiting for the moment to bring about the new heavens and the new earth. But he isn't just sitting around. He is talking to God about us. He is talking to God for us, always. So this message isn't meant to condemn us or to put us on a guilt trip. It's to show us one of the many reasons why we need Jesus.
Thank you for listening to sermon audio from Our Church Dayton. For more information on service times and ways to follow us online, please visit us at ourchurchdayton.org. That's ourchurchdayton.org.